The scissors were already in my hand when I heard her scream. It pierced through the April night, like a blade through silk. That particular cry of a child trying not to make noise, even in agony. I stood frozen in our narrow hallway, my teaching satchel still clutched in my other hand, the scent of evening prayers still clinging to my Sunday dress. Through the thin walls of our Pennsylvania farmhouse, I could hear his voice low, threatening, sickeningly gentle. If you tell your mother, she won't believe you. And if she does believe, she'll blame you. My name is Josephine Marie Connors, though everyone calls me Josie. I'm 85 now, and I've carried this story for over half a century. But that night, April 7th, 1969, was when my real education began. Not the kind they taught at Millfield Elementary, where I'd learned to read and write and dream beyond our cornfields. This was the education that comes when you discover the monster doesn't live under the bed. It lives in it. The bedroom door was slightly open. Through the narrow gap, I saw my 8-year-old daughter, Marianne, backed up against the wall. Her face streaked with silent tears, her tiny body trembling like a trapped bird. And there stood Charles, my husband, her father, the man who once wooed me with poems and promises, looming over her with a threatening expression. I didn't think. I didn't pray. I didn't hesitate. I kicked that door open and hurled myself at him like fury itself had taken possession of my bones. Get away from her. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was something primal, something that had been waiting 8 years to roar. Charles staggered backward, his face cycling through surprise guilt, and then most terrifying of all, cold calculation. Josie, you're early. Early, as if I'd interrupted him checking the accounts instead of destroying our daughter's childhood. Marianne, run. I grabbed my daughter's hand, pulling her behind me. Get Richard and go to Mrs. Catherine's house. Now. Marianne didn't argue. That 8-year-old girl who used to chatter like a songbird had learned the language of fear too well. She disappeared down the hallway like smoke, and I heard her feet on the stairs, heard her waking her little brother with urgent whispers. Charles adjusted his clothes with the casual air of a man straightening his tie. You're making a mistake, Josie. You don't understand what you saw. I understand perfectly. The scissors felt solid in my grip, real. I understand that my daughter was screaming. Children cry. It's what they do. He stepped closer, and I caught the familiar scent of his aftershave mixed with something else, something sharp and shameful. You're tired. You've been working too hard, spending too much time at that church. It's making you imagine things. This was how it started, I realized. This casual reshaping of reality, this patient erosion of a woman's ability to trust her own eyes, her own heart. How many times had he done this? How many times had I let him convince me that black was white, that wrong was right, that my instincts were just female hysteria? I'm not imagining anything, I said. And I'm not letting you touch her again. His laugh was soft, practiced. Touch her, Josie. I'm her father. I was checking if she had a fever. She said she wasn't feeling well. With your pants open? The question hung between us like a blade. For the first time, Charles's mask slipped. I saw something cold and calculating flicker across his features, the look of a man rapidly recalculating his options. You don't know what you're talking about, he said finally. But his voice had lost its certainty. The front door slammed downstairs. Marianne had made it out with Richard. Good. Whatever happened next, they were safe. I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, raising the scissors. I know about the photography studio on Market Street. I know about the special jobs you told her about. I know about the nights you visited her room when you thought I was sleeping. Charles went very still. She told you that... She told me everything. For a moment, neither of us moved. The house around us seemed to hold its breath, as if even the walls were waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Then Charles's face transformed completely. The charming mask fell away entirely, revealing something cold and hungry underneath. "You stupid woman," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you think anyone will believe you? I'm Charles Morrison, bank manager, pillar of the community. You're just a farmer's daughter who got lucky. Who do you think this town will side with? I don't care what this town thinks. You should." He took another step forward. "Because if you open your mouth, if you breathe one word of this insanity to anyone, I'll destroy you. I'll take those children away from you. I'll have you declared an unfit mother. You'll never see them again." "Over my dead body." "That," Charles said softly, "can be arranged." The threat hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the passionate anger of our earlier fights, the shouting matches that ended with thrown dishes and slammed doors. This was something else entirely. This was predatory, calculated. The voice of a man who had been planning for this conversation. But I'd been planning too, even if I hadn't realized it. Those scissors under the mattress hadn't appeared by accident. Some part of me, the part that noticed Marianne's nightmares. Richard's sudden fearfulness, the way our house had begun to feel like a trap, had been preparing for this moment. "Stay back!" I warned, but Charles kept advancing. "Put the scissors down, Josie. You're not a killer." "Try me." He lunged forward. I reacted without thinking, the scissors sweeping up in an arc that caught him across the forearm. Blood bloomed across his white shirt sleeve, and he stumbled backward with a curse. "You crazy bitch!" But I wasn't crazy. For the first time in years, I felt completely crystalline clear. I knew exactly who I was, exactly what I was fighting for, exactly what I was willing to do. "Get out," I said. "Get out of this house and don't come back." Charles pressed his hand to his arm, staring at the blood seeping between his fingers. When he looked up at me, his eyes held a fury so pure it made my skin crawl. "This isn't over," he said. "You have no idea what you've started." "Yes, I do," I replied. "I've started protecting my children, finally." He started toward the door, then turned back one last time. "Enjoy your victory, Josie. It won't last long. I'll be back for what's mine. They're not yours. They never were yours. They're mine." After he left, I stood in our bedroom for a long time, still gripping the bloody scissors, listening to the silence. The house felt different already, lighter somehow, as if a poisonous fog had finally lifted. I could breathe again. But I knew Charles wasn't lying about one thing: this wasn't over. Men like him didn't simply walk away from what they considered their property. He would be back, and next time, he wouldn't underestimate me. I had to get my children to safety, tonight. The next hour passed in a blur of desperate preparation. I threw clothes into suitcases, gathered important papers, counted the meager contents of my jewelry box, anything that could be converted to cash. Mrs. Catherine had taken the children to her house across the street, but I could see them watching from her window, their small faces pressed against the glass. I was stuffing blankets into a cardboard box when I heard the cars, 3 of them pulling into our driveway, with their headlights cutting through the darkness. I peered through the bedroom curtain and felt my heart sink. Charles sat in the passenger seat of the first car, his arm wrapped in white bandages. The driver was Sheriff Davis, a man I'd known since childhood, who'd gone to school with Charles, who drank with him at Murphy's Tavern every Friday night. They'd come to arrest me. The knock on the front door was polite but firm. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Sheriff Davis. I need to speak with you." I walked downstairs slowly, my mind racing. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Catherine's house. Could see the children's faces disappearing from the window as someone, bless her, pulled them away from the sight. When I opened the door, Sheriff Davis looked genuinely uncomfortable. Behind him stood 2 deputies I didn't recognize, and Charles wearing a clean shirt and the expression of a man wronged. "Evening, Josie," the sheriff said. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but we need to talk about what happened here tonight." "What did Charles tell you happened?" Sheriff Davis glanced back at my husband, then at the bandage on his arm. "He says you attacked him with a weapon. Says you've been acting strangely lately. Paranoid? Violent. And what do you think happened? The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. I think I need to hear your side of it. But first, I need you to come with us. For questioning. Am I under arrest? Not yet. But Charles here, well, he's pressing charges. Assault with a deadly weapon. We need to sort this out properly. I looked past the sheriff to Charles, who stood in the shadows with the expression of wounded righteousness. He'd already started rewriting the story, painting himself as the victim and me as the unstable wife who'd finally snapped. It was brilliant, really. Diabolical. Can I see my children first? I'm afraid not, Sheriff Davis said gently. They're safe with Mrs. Catherine for now. But until we get this sorted out, they can't be alone with him. I said the words, tumbling out in a rush. Sheriff, please. You've known me my whole life. You know I'm not violent. You know I wouldn't hurt Charles unless what, Josie? I met Charles's eyes across the porch. He was smiling slightly, daring me to say it. Daring me to make an accusation that would sound insane, that would mark me as a hysterical woman making up stories to justify attacking her husband. But there was something else in his expression. Something that made my blood run cold. He wasn't just confident that no one would believe me. He was confident that even if they did believe me, it wouldn't matter. Men like Charles had been getting away with things like this for centuries. The system was designed to protect them, unless I had to protect my children. I said finally. Sheriff Davis sighed. Come on, Josie. Let's go talk about this at the station. Get it all straightened out. As they led me to the patrol car, I caught one last glimpse of Mrs. Catherine's house. A curtain twitched in an upstairs window, Marianne watching her mother being taken away. I tried to smile, tried to look reassuring, but I wasn't sure if she could see my face in the darkness. The Millfield police station smelled like coffee and disappointment. They put me in a small room with a wooden table and 2 chairs, then left me alone for what felt like hours. I could hear voices in the hallway, Charles's smooth baritone mixed with the sheriff's gruffer tones, punctuated occasionally by laughter. They were discussing me like I was a problem to be solved, not a person to be heard. When Sheriff Davis finally entered the room, he carried a cup of coffee and a manila folder. He set both on the table and studied my face with the expression of a man trying to solve a puzzle. Josie, he said, settling into the chair across from me. I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your daddy was a good man. Your mama was a saint. So I'm having a hard time understanding how we got here. What did Charles tell you? He says you've been acting strange lately. Paranoid. Accusing him of things that don't make sense. Tonight, he says he came home to find you in some kind of episode. You attacked him with scissors, screaming about God knows what. And you believe him? Sheriff Davis opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed Charles's forearm, the cut I'd made clearly visible, a clean slice about 3 inches long, not deep but unmistakably deliberate. The evidence is pretty clear, Josie. You hurt him. The question is why. I stared at the photograph for a long moment, then raised my eyes to meet the sheriff's. Because I caught him hurting my daughter. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sheriff Davis's face went through several expressions: surprise, disbelief, discomfort, and finally, something that might have been pity. Josie, I caught him in Marianne's bedroom. She was crying, pressed against the wall. His pants were open. I saw it with my own eyes. That's a very serious accusation. It's the truth. Sheriff Davis leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 50-odd years. You understand what you're saying? About Charles? About a man who's been nothing but respected in this community. I understand exactly what I'm saying. Do you have any proof besides what you think you saw? Talk to Marianne. She'll tell you. Josie, she's 8 years old. Children. They get confused. They imagine things. And after tonight, after seeing her parents fighting, seeing you attack her father, he shook his head. Even if she did say something, it wouldn't be reliable. I felt something crack inside my chest. So you're not going to investigate? I'm going to do my job, Sheriff Davis said carefully. But my job right now is dealing with the fact that you assaulted your husband with a weapon. Everything else? Well, that's going to have to wait. While he has access to my children. Charles is their father. Charles is a monster. Sheriff Davis closed the folder with a snap. Josie, I'm going to give you some advice. Drop this. Go home, apologize to your husband, get some help for whatever's been eating at you. Because if you keep making these kinds of accusations, it's going to destroy your family. Destroy your children's lives. Is that what you want? I understood then that this had been decided before I ever sat down in this room. Charles had called ahead, laid the groundwork, shaped the narrative. I was the crazy wife having a breakdown. He was the long-suffering husband trying to hold his family together. What happens now? I asked. Now you go home. Charles has agreed not to press charges if you get help. Counseling, maybe some medication to help with the stress. And my children? They go home too, with their father. The room tilted slightly. You're sending them home with him? He's their legal guardian, Josie. And right now, you're the one who's been violent. I stood up so quickly that my chair toppled backward. I will not let that man near my children again. Sit down, Josie. I will not. Sit down. Sheriff Davis's voice cracked like a whip. You're already in enough trouble. Don't make it worse. I remained standing, my hands pressed flat against the table. What if you're wrong? What if I'm telling the truth? What if you send my children home with a predator and something happens to them? For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across the sheriff's face. Charles is a good man, a respected man. So is my father. That didn't stop him from beating my mother black and blue every Saturday night. Sheriff Davis went very still. Your father never... My father was a drunk and a brute, and everyone in this town knew it. But he was respected. He was a man, so everyone pretended not to see the bruises, not to hear the screaming. Just like you're pretending not to hear me now. The silence stretched between us thick with uncomfortable truths. Finally, Sheriff Davis stood up. Charles is waiting outside to take you home, he said. I suggest you go quietly. But as I reached the door, he spoke again. Josie. I turned back. If there's ever any real evidence, anything concrete, you bring it to me. It wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in the wall of masculine solidarity that protected men like Charles. Thank you, I said. Outside, Charles waited beside his car, his bandaged arm cradled against his chest like a war wound. When he saw me emerge from the station, he smiled, not the charming smile that had won me over at that long-ago 4th of July celebration, but something cold and predatory. Ready to go home, dear? He asked loud enough for the deputies to hear. I got into the passenger seat without a word. As we drove through Millfield's empty streets, Charles hummed softly to himself a tune I recognized from our courting days. It was grotesquely cheerful, like whistling in a graveyard. That went well, he said as we pulled into our driveway. Don't you think? I didn't respond. The sheriff's a reasonable man. Understands that sometimes wives, sometimes they get ideas, especially when they've been working too hard, spending too much time away from home. The house looked different in the darkness, smaller, somehow more fragile. Like a house made of cards that could be blown down with a strong breath. The children, I said, are asleep at Mrs. Catherine's. I thought it best to let them stay there tonight. Give us time to talk. My blood went cold. We were alone. The neighbors would assume we were making up, working things out like civilized adults. No one would come running if I screamed. Charles, did you really think you could threaten me? His voice was conversational, almost friendly. Did you think you could cut me with scissors and walk away? Make accusations like that and face no consequences? We sat in the car outside our house engine, ticking as it cooled. Charles made no move to get out. I was protecting my daughter. You were protecting nothing. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with crushing force. You want to know what happens now? Josie, now you learn what real consequences look like. Let go of me. First, you're going to stop teaching. A woman who attacks her husband with scissors clearly can't be trusted around children. I'll speak to the school board tomorrow. Charles, his grip tightened. Second, you're going to see Dr. Morrison in Harrisburg. He's very good with cases like yours. Nervous breakdowns, paranoid delusions. He'll prescribe something to help you think more clearly. Dr. Morrison, Charles's cousin, of course. Third, Charles continued, you're going to apologize. To me, to the sheriff, to anyone who'll listen. You're going to explain that you've been under stress, that you misunderstood what you saw, that you're deeply sorry for the trouble you've caused. And if I don't, Charles smiled, then I'll have you committed. Dr. Morrison will testify that you're a danger to yourself and others. The sheriff will back up my account of tonight's attack. You'll spend the next several years in the state hospital receiving the care you so desperately need. The state hospital. I'd heard stories about that place. Women went in for nervous conditions and never came out the same, if they came out at all. While you're gone, Charles added conversationally, I'll raise our children, alone. I'll tell them their mother was sick, that she had to go away for treatment. Maybe I'll remarry, give them a proper stepmother who won't fill their heads with nonsense. You bastard! I'm a practical man, Josie. I plan ahead. I make contingencies. He released my wrist, and I could see the red marks his fingers had left. You forced my hand tonight. Made me accelerate my timeline. But that's all right. I've been thinking about this for quite some time. About what? About how to handle you when you became a problem. When you started noticing things you shouldn't notice, asking questions you shouldn't ask. He straightened his tie with his uninjured hand. Wives can be so inconvenient sometimes. I stared at him in the dim light of the car's interior, finally seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the Charles who'd courted me with poetry and flowers. Not even the angry, violent Charles who'd been terrorizing our family for years. This was someone else entirely. Someone who'd been there all along, hiding behind the mask. How long? I whispered. How long what? How long have you been planning this? Charles considered the question seriously. Since before we married, really. I knew you were too smart, too independent. I knew eventually you'd become a liability. So I've been very careful to establish myself in this community, to build relationships, to position myself as the victim of an unstable wife. The job at the bank was perfect for building credibility, as was marrying the local school teacher, such a respectable choice. And having children with you? Well, that gave me excellent leverage. I felt sick. You never loved me. I loved the idea of you. A beautiful, educated woman who would give me beautiful, intelligent children. But love? He shrugged. Love is a luxury I can't afford. Love makes people unpredictable. And Marianne, Charles' expression didn't change. Marianne is mine, just like you are, just like Richard is. I can do whatever I want with what belongs to me. She's a child. She's my child, my property, my decision what happens to her. The casual way he said it, as if he were discussing livestock, made something snap inside me. This wasn't a man having a breakdown consumed by rage or jealousy or mental illness. This was a predator who'd built his entire life around the systematic abuse of his family. And he was right about one thing: the system was designed to protect him. The law, the community, the church, they would all side with the respectable bank manager over the hysterical wife. Even if I could prove what he'd done to Marianne, it would be my word against his. The word of a woman who'd already been branded as unstable. I want to see my children, I said. Of course, tomorrow after you've had time to think about our conversation. After you've decided to be reasonable. And if I'm not reasonable, Charles opened the car door. Then you'll never see them again. As I lay in bed that night alone, Charles having taken the guest room, I stared at the ceiling and tried to think of a way out. But every path led to the same conclusion: I was trapped. He held all the cards, had all the power commanded, all the respect. Unless the idea came to me slowly, like dawn breaking over a cloudy sky. Charles had made one mistake in his perfect plan. He'd shown me who he really was, and more importantly, he'd shown me what he was capable of. That gave me something he didn't expect: certainty. I wasn't fighting to save my marriage anymore. I wasn't trying to reform an angry husband or fix a troubled man. I was fighting a predator who had systematically groomed an entire community to enable his crimes. And predators, I realized, had weaknesses. They were confident, yes, careful, yes, but they were also arrogant. They believed their own mythology. They thought they were untouchable. Charles Morrison was about to learn how wrong he was. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. Charles was already gone when I woke, presumably to work, though more likely to continue building his narrative around town. The dutiful husband dealing with his disturbed wife. I walked across the street to Mrs. Catherine's house. She answered the door with worried eyes and flour-covered hands. "Josie, dear, how are you holding up? I need to see my children." She hesitated. "Charles stopped by earlier. He said you'd been having some difficulties. That maybe the children should stay here a bit longer while you recover." "Mrs. Catherine, I need you to listen to me very carefully. My children are in danger." The older woman's face crumpled with confusion and concern. "Danger from what?" "From their father." I spent the next hour telling Mrs. Catherine everything. Every detail of Charles's abuse, every sign I'd missed, every moment of that terrible night. When I finished, she sat in stunned silence for a long time. "Dear Lord," she whispered finally, "and you're certain about what you saw?" "I caught him in the act. But Charles, he's such a charming man, so well regarded. The most dangerous predators always are." Mrs. Catherine stood up abruptly and began pacing around her small kitchen. "If this is true, if even half of this is true," "It is true. Then we have to do something. We have to protect those babies. Who would believe us?" Mrs. Catherine stopped pacing. "Father Thomas, the priest. He's been here longer than anyone, seen more. If anyone would listen." It was a slim hope, but it was hope. "Would you come with me?" "Of course, dear. But first," she looked toward the stairs where I could hear children's voices. "First, you should talk to Marianne. Ask her what she wants to tell you." I found my daughter in the small upstairs bedroom, sitting on the floor, with Richard building towers out of wooden blocks. When she saw me, her face lit up with relief. "Mama!" I gathered her into my arms, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid weight of her small body against mine. Alive. Safe. For now. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" She nodded, but I could see the shadows in her eyes. "Mrs. Catherine said Daddy got hurt, that you had to go talk to the police." "Something like that." I sat down beside her, choosing my words carefully. "Marianne, I need to ask you about some things, some difficult things. Can you be brave for me?" She nodded solemnly. When he does things that make you uncomfortable, things that hurt you, have you ever told anyone besides me?" Marianne shook her head. "He said it was our special secret, that if I told something bad would happen to you." "What kind of bad thing?" "He said you might get sick, like Grandma Sarah did before she died. He said sometimes mamas get sick when they worry too much." My heart clenched. Charles had been manipulating our daughter's love for me, using it as a weapon to ensure her silence. It was diabolical. "Sweetheart, nothing you tell me will make me sick. And I promise you, no matter what happens, I will never leave you. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears starting to leak from her eyes. "If someone asked you to tell them about the things Daddy does someone like Father Thomas or a doctor, would you be able to do that? Would it help? It might help keep you and Richard safe?" Marianne looked over at her little brother, who was still absorbed in his blocks, blissfully unaware of the adult conversation happening around him. When she looked back at me, her expression was older than her 8 years. "Then I'll tell them everything." Father Thomas Murphy had been the parish priest at St. Mary's for over 30 years. He'd baptized me as an infant, presided over my first communion, officiated at my wedding. If anyone in Millfield could be trusted with the truth, it was him. Mrs. Catherine and I found him in the church office working on his sermon for Sunday. When he saw us, he smiled warmly. Josie Catherine, what brings you by on this fine Thursday morning? Father, Mrs. Catherine began, we need to speak with you about something serious, something disturbing. The priest's expression grew solemn. He gestured for us to sit in the chairs across from his desk. Of course, whatever I can do to help. I told him everything. The entire story from Charles's first episodes of anger to the events of the previous night. Father Thomas listened without interruption, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. These are very serious accusations, Josie, he said finally. I know. And you're certain about what you saw? Father, I caught him in the act. There's no ambiguity here. He nodded slowly. And the child? Marianne? She's confirmed this.
She has, and she's willing to speak to others about it.
Father Thomas stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the empty churchyard. Charles Morrison has been a pillar of this community, a generous contributor to the church, a man of apparent integrity. My heart sank, not Father Thomas too. But then he turned back to us, and his eyes were blazing with righteous anger. Whoa, which makes his crimes all the more heinous, he said firmly. The abuse of innocence is the gravest sin I can imagine, and the exploitation of trust, of a father's sacred duty to protect his children. You believe me? I've been a priest for 40 years, Josie. I've heard confession from saints and sinners alike. I know the sound of truth when I hear it. He sat back down, his expression grim. The question is, what do we do about it?
The sheriff won't listen, Mrs. Catherine said. He's already decided Josie is having some kind of breakdown. Sheriff Davis is a good man, but he's also a practical one. He sees the world in simple terms, good men and bad men with very little gray area. The idea that a respected member of the community could be capable of such things, it doesn't fit his worldview.
So we need evidence, I said. Something undeniable.
Yes. But more than that, we need a plan. Charles Morrison is a clever man. If he feels cornered, he'll become dangerous. We need to be very careful how we proceed. Father Thomas opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small notebook. First, we document everything. Every incident, every detail, every witness. We build a case that's so comprehensive, so well documented, that even Sheriff Davis can't ignore it.
And second,
we get those children somewhere safe. Somewhere Charles can't reach them. Where he's their legal father. The law is on his side. Father Thomas smiled grimly. The law, yes. But there are other kinds of authority in this world. Higher authorities.
Over the next 3 days, we worked with quiet desperation to build our case. Father Thomas used his connections throughout the region to gather information about Charles, and what we discovered was chilling. There had been incidents at his previous job in Philadelphia. Nothing proven, nothing prosecuted but whispers. Questions about his interactions with female employees. A young teller who'd quit suddenly after making vague accusations. Another woman who transferred to a different branch after complaining about inappropriate behavior. Charles Morrison wasn't just an abusive husband and father. He was a serial predator who'd been carefully managing his image while moving from place to place, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. He chose Millfield deliberately. Father Thomas explained as we sat in his office reviewing the evidence we'd gathered. A small town where he could become a big fish in a small pond, where his credentials and charm would carry more weight than they would in a city. And he chose me for the same reason, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. The local school teacher, respectable, someone whose reputation would lend credibility to his own. More than that, Mrs. Catherine added, he chose a woman with no family nearby, no strong support network, someone who would be isolated if things went wrong. It was true. My parents were dead, my siblings scattered. Charles had subtly discouraged friendships, made social gatherings difficult. I'd thought it was just his preference for quiet evenings at home. Now I understood it was deliberate isolation, a classic tactic of abusers.
But we still needed more than circumstantial evidence and old rumors. We needed something concrete, something that would force the authorities to act. That's when Father Thomas proposed the most dangerous part of our plan. "We need to catch him in the act," he said. "Document it. Get photographic evidence. How? You go home. Act repentant. Convince him that you've accepted his version of events, that you're willing to seek help. Get him to let his guard down. And then we wait, and we watch. And when he makes his next move against Marianne, we're ready." It was risky. If Charles suspected what we were planning, if he realized I was gathering evidence against him, there was no telling what he might do. But it was also our only chance. "I'll do it," I said. Mrs. Catherine grabbed my hand. "It's too dangerous." "It's more dangerous to do nothing. Every day we wait is another day he has access to my children." Father Thomas nodded grimly. "I have a camera. Small enough to hide, but good enough to capture clear images. And I'll position myself where I can observe the house. If anything goes wrong, what about the children? We'll make sure they're protected. Mrs. Catherine will find reasons to keep them at her house as much as possible. And when the time comes, when we have what we need, I'll help you get them somewhere Charles can never find them. Where I have a cousin who runs a school for girls in Harrisburg, Sister Margaret. She's dealt with situations like this before. She'll take you and the children in no questions asked." It wasn't a perfect plan. There were a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it was our best option. That evening, I walked across the street to my own house like a condemned woman approaching the gallows. The lights were on in the living room, and I could see Charles through the window, reading his newspaper as if nothing had happened. As if our world hadn't shattered 3 nights ago. I knocked on my own front door, a surreal experience that made me feel like a stranger in my own life. Charles opened it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Josie, I was wondering when you'd come home. May I come in?" "Of course. This is your home." But the way he said it made it clear that my welcome was conditional. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my hands folded in my lap like a penitent schoolgirl. Charles settled into his armchair, the one he'd always claimed as his territory, and waited. "I've been thinking—" I began the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "About what happened, about what you said. And I think maybe you're right. Maybe I have been under too much stress. Maybe I misunderstood what I saw." Charles leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Go on." "I want to get help. I want to see Dr. Morrison like you suggested. I want to fix whatever's wrong with me. And the children. I want them to come home. I want us to be a family again." For a long moment, Charles said nothing. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, calculating whether my submission was genuine or performed. "You attacked me with scissors, Josie. Cut me open. That's not the action of a rational woman." "I know. I'm sorry. I was confused, frightened. I thought I saw something that wasn't there." "And now you understand that what you thought you saw was impossible, that a loving father would never harm his children." Each word was a knife twist, but I forced myself to nod. "I understand." Charles stood up and walked to the window, looking across the street toward Mrs. Catherine's house. "The children have been asking about you, especially Marianne. She's been having nightmares." "About what?" "About that night. About watching her mother attack her father. About the police coming. She's very confused, Josie. Very frightened." The bastard was already laying the groundwork to explain away any future testimony from Marianne. If she spoke about his abuse, he could claim it was confusion stemming from the trauma of that night. "I'd like to apologize to her, to both of them. Of course. Tomorrow, perhaps, after you've had time to settle back in." He turned from the window. "There will be conditions, naturally." "What kind of conditions?" "You'll resign from your teaching position, immediately. A woman who's had a nervous breakdown has no business influencing young minds." I bit back my protest. "All right. You'll see Dr. Morrison weekly. You'll take whatever medication he prescribes. You'll follow his treatment plan exactly." "Yes." "And you'll be more attentive to your duties as a wife and mother. No more late nights at church meetings. No more friendships that distract you from your family. He was systematically cutting me off from every source of support, every connection to the outside world. Classic abuser tactics. I understand. Charles smiled, then the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in days. But it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a man who just won a chess match. Good. I'm glad we understand each other. He sat back down, picked up his newspaper. There's leftover casserole in the refrigerator if you're hungry. Mrs. Catherine brought it by yesterday. Dismissed, like a servant who'd just received her instructions. I retreated to our bedroom, where I sat on the edge of the bed and tried not to vomit. Every fiber of my being screamed against what I was doing, this performance of submission, this pretense that I believed his lies. But it was necessary. For Marianne, for Richard, for the chance to gather the evidence we needed. That night, Charles came to bed like nothing had changed. He kissed my forehead with casual ownership, settled beside me with a satisfied sigh. I'm glad you've come to your senses, Josie, he murmured in the darkness. Tomorrow, we'll start fresh. A new beginning for our family. I lay awake long after his breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, staring at the ceiling and planning. Father Thomas would be watching the house. The camera was hidden in my sewing box, ready to be deployed when the moment came. All I had to do was wait for Charles to make his move. I didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, after I'd made the required phone call to resign from my teaching position and scheduled my first appointment with Dr. Morrison, Charles announced that the children could come home. But gradually, he said, we don't want to overwhelm them. Richard can come home tonight. Marianne tomorrow. My blood chilled. He was separating them, making sure Marianne would be alone with him. Why not both tonight? Because Marianne needs more time to adjust. She's been more affected by recent events. She needs individual attention. Individual attention? The phrase made my skin crawl. That evening, Richard came bounding through the front door like a puppy released from a kennel. At 3 years old, he was too young to fully understand what had happened, but old enough to sense the tension that had gripped our household. Mama. He threw himself into my arms with such force that I nearly toppled backward. I missed you. I missed you too, baby. I held him tight, breathing in his little boy's scent of soap and cookies and innocence. So much. Charles watched our reunion with apparent satisfaction. See everything back to normal. But nothing was normal. Over dinner, I caught Charles studying Richard with an expression I'd never seen before, calculating, appraising. My son was 3 years old, still in diapers at night, still small enough to carry. But he was a beautiful child, with Charles's light eyes and my dark hair. And Charles had made it clear that he considered his children his property to do with as he pleased. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Charles wasn't just a threat to Marianne. He was a threat to both my children. Maybe not now, Richard was still too young, but eventually, when he got older, more interesting to a predator's twisted mind. That night, after putting Richard to bed, I excused myself to use the bathroom and quickly retrieved the camera from my sewing box. It was smaller than I'd expected, about the size of a cigarette pack with a simple lever mechanism. Father Thomas had shown me how to operate it. Point press, advance the film. I hid it in the deep pocket of my house dress, where it rested against my hip like a cold secret. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Charles went to work as usual, playing the role of the responsible bank manager, while I played the role of the repentant wife. I cleaned the house, prepared meals, performed all the domestic rituals that had once given me satisfaction but now felt like elaborate theater. Around 4 o'clock, Mrs. Catherine brought Marianne home. My daughter looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. She clung to my hand as Mrs. Catherine made polite conversation about the weather and the church bazaar, her eyes darting nervously around the house, as if expecting monsters to emerge from the shadows. How are you feeling, sweetheart? I asked when Mrs. Catherine had gone. Scared? Marianne admitted. I don't want to be here when Daddy comes home. Why not?
She looked up at me with those enormous dark eyes, my eyes, and I saw knowledge there that no 8-year-old should possess.
Because he's been different. Since that night, angrier. Mrs. Catherine heard him talking to Sheriff Davis yesterday. He said things about me. Bad things.
What kind of things? He said I was a liar, that I make up stories for attention, that I'm... She struggled with the word. Disturbed, like you are. My heart clenched. Charles was already poisoning the well, making sure that if Marianne ever tried to tell anyone what he'd done, they'd dismiss her as a troubled child from a troubled family. Marianne, listen to me. You are not disturbed. You are not a liar. And you are the bravest little girl I know.
Then why does Daddy say those things? Because sometimes people say things that aren't true to protect themselves, to make themselves feel better about the wrong things they do. Marianne nodded solemnly. Like when he told me not to tell you about the photography man. The photography man, Mr. Kellerman, the one with the camera who takes the special pictures.
My blood went cold. This was the first time Marianne had mentioned a name. Tell me about Mr. Kellerman. He has a house on Market Street. Daddy takes me there sometimes. He says it's for special jobs, but I don't like it. Mr. Kellerman makes me wear different clothes or no clothes. And he takes pictures while Daddy watches. The room seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't just abuse happening in our home behind closed doors. Charles was taking our daughter to other locations involving other people. There was a network. How many times has Daddy taken you there?
Lots. Since I was 6, maybe. At first, it was just dress-up pictures. Pretty dresses like for magazines. But then, she trailed off, her small face scrunching with distress. It's okay. You don't have to tell me everything right now.
But I needed to know. Not just for our case, but for my daughter's safety. If there were other men involved, if this was bigger than just Charles.
Marianne, are there other children at Mr. Kellerman's house, other girls like you? She nodded. Sometimes, but Daddy says I'm special, his favorite. He says the pictures of me are worth more money than the other girls.
Money? Of course. Charles wasn't just abusing our daughter. He was selling images of that abuse, profiting from her innocence.
The sound of a car in the driveway made us both freeze. Charles was home early. Marianne, go to your room, I whispered urgently. Play with your dolls. Act normal. Can you do that for me?
She nodded and scampered upstairs just as the front door opened.
Josie, I'm home. Charles's voice carried its usual forced cheer. How's our girl settling in? Fine. I called back, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. She's upstairs playing. Charles appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his banker's suit, his face flushed with what looked like excitement. Good day at work, I asked, continuing to stir the pot of soup I'd been making. Excellent day. Very productive. He loosened his tie, hung his jacket on the back of a chair. I have some business to attend to this evening. Won't be home until late. What kind of business?
Bank business. Nothing that would interest you. But there was something in his tone, a barely contained eagerness that made my skin crawl. He went upstairs to change clothes, and I heard him talking to Marianne in her room. Their voices were too low for me to make out words, but I could hear the cadence of his speech, commanding, insistent. And underneath it, Marianne's responses growing more hesitant and frightened. When he came back downstairs, he was wearing casual clothes instead of his usual evening attire. I'll be leaving around 7, he announced. The children should be in bed by 8. And both of them. His eyes met mine, and I saw a challenge there. Marianne especially. She needs her rest. Growing girls require lots of sleep. After dinner, as I helped Richard with his bath, I heard Charles talking to Marianne again. This time, I crept closer to her door and listened. "A special job tonight?" he was saying. "Mr. Kellerman has been asking about you. Says you photograph beautifully." "I don't want to." Marianne's voice was small, frightened. "What you want doesn't matter. What matters is what Daddy needs. And Daddy needs you to be a good girl tonight." "But you said we weren't going to do that anymore."
You promised after Mama found out. Mama found out nothing.
Charles's voice turned sharp. Mama had a breakdown. Mama is sick and confused. And if you ever tell her about our business again, Mama might have to go away to a hospital where they help sick people get better. Is that what you want?
No, Marianne whispered. Good. So tonight, when I come to get you, you'll come quietly. No fuss, no tears. Just like always. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, my heart hammering so hard. I was certain Charles would hear it. He was planning to take Marianne out tonight, to that house on Market Street, to Mr. Kellerman's camera. This was our chance. The evidence we needed. But it also meant letting my daughter walk into hell while I followed behind with a hidden camera.
Could I do it? Could I let Charles take Marianne to that place, knowing what would happen to her there, just for the sake of evidence? The alternative was even worse, letting him continue forever, with no one believing us, no way to stop him. At 7 o'clock sharp, Charles left the house. I watched from the kitchen window as he drove away in his car, supposedly heading to his mysterious bank business. But I knew better. He was going to prepare. To set things up. He'd be back for Marianne within the hour.
I waited until I was sure he was gone, then ran upstairs to Marianne's room. She was sitting on her bed, already dressed in a simple white dress that I'd never seen before.
Did Daddy tell you to wear that?
She nodded miserably. He brought it home yesterday, said it was for tonight. The dress was clearly chosen for its ease of removal. The buttons were large, accessible. The fabric was thin, almost translucent in the lamplight. Marianne listened to me very carefully. Daddy is going to take you somewhere tonight, isn't he? Another nod. And you're scared?
Yes, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to be there watching, making sure you're safe.
Marianne's eyes widened. But Daddy said,
Daddy says a lot of things that aren't true. I'm your mother, and it's my job to protect you. Do you trust me?
Yes. Then I need you to be very brave tonight. Braver than you've ever been. Can you do that?
What do I have to do?
I knelt beside her bed, taking her small hands in mine. You have to do what Daddy says. I know that's scary. I know you don't want to. But it's the only way I can get proof of what he's doing. Proof that will make people believe us.
And then he'll go away. Then he'll go away forever.
Marianne squeezed my hands tightly. Okay, Mama. I'll be brave. At 8:15, Charles returned. I heard his car in the driveway, heard his footsteps on the front porch. I was in the living room, ostensibly reading a magazine, when he came through the door. How are the children? He asked. Richard's asleep. Marianne's in her room. Good. Charles checked his watch. I need to make one more stop tonight. Business matter. I'll be taking Marianne with me. Why? Because I said so. His voice carried a warning edge. Don't question me, Josie. We've discussed this. I forced myself to nod submissively. Of course. How long will you be gone? A couple of hours. Maybe longer. He started toward the stairs. Don't wait up. I waited until I heard him talking to Marianne. Waited until I heard their footsteps on the stairs. Then I grabbed my coat and slipped out the back door. Father Thomas was waiting in the shadows beside our garden shed, just as we'd planned. He pressed something small and heavy into my hand, a second camera backup, in case something went wrong. Market Street, he whispered. I nodded. I'll go around the block approach from the other direction. If anything goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. But as I said it, Charles and Marianne emerged from the front of the house. In the porch light, my daughter looked impossibly small and vulnerable in that white dress. Charles had his hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the car with possessive familiarity. I waited until they drove away before following, keeping my distance. Market Street was on the other side of town, a rundown area where the houses were smaller and the streetlights farther apart. Perfect for concealing the kind of business Charles and Mr. Kellerman were conducting. The house was easier to spot than I'd expected. Light spilled from the windows of a small blue cottage, and I could see figures moving around inside. Charles's car was parked in the driveway, alongside two others I didn't recognize. I crept through the neighboring yard, using a line of overgrown hedges for cover. From there, I had a clear view into what appeared to be a converted basement studio. Professional lighting equipment, camera stands, and props that made my stomach turn children's furniture toys costumes. And children. 3 of them besides Marianne, all girls, all between the ages of 6 and 10. They sat on a couch along one wall, dressed in similar white dresses, their faces blank with the terrible resignation of children who'd learned not to fight. Charles stood near the camera equipment talking to a heavy-set man with thinning hair and thick glasses, Mr. Kellerman presumably. Money changed hands. Instructions were given. The man nodded and began adjusting his camera. This was bigger than I'd imagined. This wasn't just Charles abusing his own daughter. This was an organized operation involving multiple children, multiple clients. A business. I raised my camera and began taking pictures, trying to document everything I could see. The faces, the equipment, the money exchange. Every click of the shutter felt like a small victory, another piece of evidence that would bring this nightmare to an end. But then Mr. Kellerman gestured toward the children, and my hands began to shake. He was starting the session. For the next hour, I watched through that window as my daughter and 3 other little girls were posed, photographed and violated in ways that will haunt me until the day I die. I took pictures of it all, each frame burning itself into my memory like a brand. Marianne never cried. She'd learned, as all these children had learned, that crying only made things worse. She followed instructions with the mechanical obedience of a trained animal, her eyes fixed on some point beyond the camera, beyond the room, beyond the reality of what was happening to her. I wanted to burst through that window. I wanted to grab my daughter and run, but I forced myself to stay hidden, to keep taking pictures to gather the evidence we needed. It was nearly midnight when the session finally ended. I watched Charles collect Marianne, saw money change hands again, saw Mr. Kellerman shake hands with another man I hadn't noticed before, someone who'd been standing in the shadows observing. When the stranger stepped into the light, my blood turned to ice. It was Sheriff Davis, the man I'd begged to help me, the man who'd dismissed my accusations as the ravings of an hysterical woman, was part of this network, had been all along. Everything suddenly made sense. Why my report had been ignored. Why Charles had been so confident about his immunity from prosecution. Why he'd known exactly what to say to make me sound crazy. This wasn't just a case of one predator abusing his family. This was a conspiracy involving some of the most powerful men in our community. Men who protected each other, who covered for each other's crimes, who'd built a system that allowed them to prey on children with impunity. I was still reeling from this revelation when I heard footsteps behind me. Well, what do we have here? I spun around to find a third man, tall, thin, with cold eyes and a cruel smile. I'd never seen him before, but he clearly knew who I was. Mrs. Morrison, isn't it Charles's wife? I clutched the camera tighter, trying to think of a way to run. But he was between me and the street, and shouting would only bring the others. "You've been taking pictures," he observed, nodding toward the camera in my hands. "That's very naughty, very dangerous." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please, don't insult my intelligence." He took a step closer. "The question is, what do we do about this little problem?" Before I could answer, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. "I think," he said conversationally, "that you've seen enough." My mind raced. If this man killed me here, my children would be left completely at Charles's mercy. Marianne would disappear into this network forever. Richard would eventually follow. But if I could get away, if I could get these photos developed— "Wait," I said, buying time. "You don't want to shoot me here. Too noisy, too messy." He considered this. "Good point. Walk." He gestured with the gun toward a dark alley that ran behind the houses. I knew that if I walked into that alley, I'd never walk out again. "No." "Excuse me." "I said no." I raised the camera. "I've already taken dozens of pictures. If you kill me, those pictures will still exist. My friend will develop them. The truth will come out. What friend? Father Thomas Murphy. He knows I'm here. He knows what we'd find. If I don't return by morning, he'll take these photos to the state police. It was a bluff, but a good one. The man's confidence wavered. You're lying.
Am I? Are you willing to bet your entire operation on it? We stared at each other in the darkness, the gun steady in his hand, the camera steady in mine. A standoff.
Then Charles appeared around the corner of the house, leading Marianne by the hand. When he saw us, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally cold calculation. Problem, Josie? He asked as casually as if we'd encountered each other at the grocery store. Your wife was taking pictures, the gunman explained, documenting tonight's activities. Charles studied me for a long moment. How much did you see? Everything. And the pictures? I held up the camera. Safe and sound. Give it to me. No.
Charles sighed as if I were a difficult child who was testing his patience.
Harold, put the gun away. There's a better way to handle this.
The gunman Harold looked skeptical but lowered his weapon.
You see, Josie?
Charles continued.
You've stumbled into something much bigger than you realize. This isn't just about our family anymore. This is about a business that serves very important people. People with money, influence, power. People like Sheriff Davis. Charles smiled. Sheriff Davis is just the local muscle. We have clients who make him look like a Sunday school teacher, judges, politicians, business leaders, men who pay very well for our services. Services? You mean selling children? I mean providing a commodity to a very specialized market. And that market is far more extensive than you could possibly imagine. As he spoke, I became aware of movement around us. More men emerging from the shadows surrounding us. This wasn't just Charles and Mr. Kellerman and Harold. This was an organization. The thing is, Charles continued, we can't have loose ends, can't have hysterical wives running around with cameras threatening to expose years of careful work. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you have two choices. You can join us, become part of the operation. Help us recruit new children, manage the business side of things. In exchange, we'll make sure you and Richard are very well taken care of. And Marianne? Marianne is already part of the business, has been for years. She's one of our most popular models. The casual way he said it made me want to vomit. And my second choice? Your second choice is that you have a tragic accident. A break-in gone wrong, perhaps, or a car crash on a lonely road. These things happen to unstable women who've been making wild accusations. I looked down at Marianne, still standing beside her father in that awful white dress. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something there that surprised me, not fear, but determination. My brave little girl was waiting for her moment, just as I was waiting for mine. I need time to think, I said. I'm afraid time is a luxury we can't afford. Charles replied. You need to decide, right now. That's when Marianne made her move. She bit down hard on Charles's hand, the one holding her shoulder, and when he yelped and loosened his grip, she broke free and ran straight to me. Mama, run! The distraction was all I needed. I grabbed Marianne's hand and bolted toward the street, clutching the camera against my chest like a lifeline. Behind us, I heard Charles shouting orders, heard footsteps pursuing us. But Marianne and I knew these streets better than they did. We cut through yards, vaulted fences, took shortcuts that only locals would know. We ran until our lungs burned, until our legs shook, until we finally collapsed on the steps of St. Mary's Church. Father Thomas found us there 20 minutes later, gasping and crying and holding each other in the darkness. Dear God, he whispered when I told him what we'd discovered. This is worse than we imagined. We have pictures, I said, showing him the camera. Evidence. It won't be enough, not if Sheriff Davis is involved. They'll confiscate the film, destroy it, claim it never existed. Then what do we do? Father Thomas was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he stood up with the expression of a man who'd just made a difficult decision. We bypass local law enforcement entirely. I have contacts in Harrisburg in the state attorney general's office. people who can't be bought or intimidated. How long will that take? Too long. They'll come looking for you tonight. For both of you. He helped us to our feet. We need to get you somewhere safe. Right now.
We spent the next 3 hours in Father Thomas's rectory developing the film in his makeshift darkroom. The images were even more damning than I'd hoped, clear pictures of Charles, Mr. Kellerman, Sheriff Davis, and several other men I recognized from around town. Pictures of the children, the money exchange, the equipment. Evidence that would destroy them all. As dawn broke over Millfield, Father Thomas's contact in Harrisburg, arrived a serious-looking woman in her 40s named Detective Margaret Kane from the state police. She studied our photographs with growing horror.
This is extensive, she said finally. We're talking about dozens of potential victims, multiple crime scenes, a network that probably extends beyond this county. Can you prosecute? We can try, but it's going to take time to build a case this complex. Months, maybe years, and in the meantime, they'll come after us. Detective Kane nodded grimly. I can offer you protective custody, federal witness protection if necessary. But you'd have to leave everything behind. Start over somewhere new. I looked down at Marianne, who'd fallen asleep in my arms, despite everything that had happened. She looked so young, so fragile, but she'd been braver tonight than most adults would have been in the same situation. What about Richard? He'd come with you, of course, the whole family. And Charles, the others. We'll arrest them as soon as we have enough evidence to make charges stick. But I have to be honest with you men like this, with the connections, they have the resources. They don't go down easy. It wasn't the answer I'd hoped for, but it was better than nothing. At least my children would be safe while the legal system slowly ground toward justice. There's something else, Detective Kane added. Something you should know. We've been investigating reports of similar networks in other counties. This isn't isolated to Millfield. It's part of something much larger. How much larger? Big enough that your testimony, your photographs could help us shut down operations across the entire state. Maybe beyond.
So this was my choice: disappear into witness protection and hope that justice would eventually be served, or stay and fight and risk everything.
Looking down at my sleeping daughter, the choice was obvious. When do we leave?
2 days later, Josephine Marie Connors, the schoolteacher from Millfield, Pennsylvania, ceased to exist. In her place appeared Margaret Collins, a widow from Ohio who'd moved to Oregon with her 2 children to start fresh after her husband's death.
The transition wasn't easy. Richard adapted quickly, as young children do, but Marianne struggled with nightmares, panic attacks, the lingering trauma of everything she'd endured. We found her a good therapist, enrolled her in a progressive school that emphasized healing and creativity over rigid discipline.
Slowly, painfully, she began to heal. As for me, I took a job teaching at a small college in Portland, using credentials that Detective Kane's people had carefully crafted. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly independent, not dependent on a husband, not beholden to a community's expectations, not trapped by circumstances beyond my control. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. We'd been in Oregon for 6 months when Detective Kane called with news. The investigation had expanded beyond anything they'd initially imagined. Using our photographs as a starting point, they'd uncovered a network of abuse that stretched across multiple states, involving hundreds of children and dozens of prominent men. Charles and his associates are all in federal custody, she told me. The evidence you provided was the key that unlocked everything. What kind of sentences are they looking at? Life imprisonment, all of them. Charles specifically is facing charges in 3 states. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. But mostly, I just felt tired. Justice was being served, but it couldn't undo the damage that had already been done. It couldn't give Marianne back her innocence or erase the memories that still woke her screaming in the night. There's something else, Detective Kane continued. We found evidence that Charles had been planning to escalate, to involve Richard. My hand tightened on the phone. What kind of evidence? Photographs, not of Richard himself, but preparation photos. Charles was documenting Richard's development, taking pictures of him sleeping, bathing, building a portfolio. The room spun around me.
I'd saved my children just in time. Another few months, and Charles would have destroyed Richard's childhood just as he'd destroyed Marianne's. "I need you to know," Detective Kane said, "that your courage, yours and Marianne's, saved dozens of other children. Maybe hundreds. That network would have kept operating for years if you hadn't been brave enough to speak up." After I hung up the phone, I sat in my small Oregon kitchen and cried for the first time since leaving Pennsylvania. Not tears of sadness, but of relief, of closure, of a grief finally allowed to surface. The next morning, I told Marianne and Richard the truth about why we'd left Pennsylvania, about what had really happened to their father. Richard was too young to fully understand, but Marianne listened with the grave attention of someone far older than her 9 years. "Is he never coming back?" she asked when I finished. "Never." "Good." She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Mama, I want to help other kids like me. When I grow up, I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." How would you do that?" "I want to be a lawyer. I want to put bad people in jail." And she did. Marianne graduated valedictorian from her high school, earned a scholarship to Stanford, went on to law school at Harvard. She became a prosecutor specializing in crimes against children, one of the most respected attorneys in the Pacific Northwest. Richard followed a different path, but with the same underlying compassion. He became a pediatrician, dedicating his career to helping children heal from trauma. Both of my children grew up to be exactly the kind of people the world needed more of, not despite what they'd endured, but because of it. As for me, I remained Margaret Collins for the rest of my life. I never remarried, never felt the need to. I'd learned that I was stronger alone than I'd ever been as half of a couple. I built a good life in Oregon, teaching literature to eager college students, gardening, traveling during summer breaks. But I never forgot Josephine Connors, the young woman who'd been brave enough to pick up a pair of scissors and fight for her children's lives. She lived on in every lecture I gave about courage in literature, in every discussion of characters who faced impossible choices and chose love over safety. I'm 85 years old now, and I've finally decided to tell this story publicly. Not for revenge, Charles Morrison died in federal prison 15 years ago, forgotten and unmourned. Not for sympathy, I've had a good life, a full life surrounded by people who love and respect me. I'm telling this story for the women who are living it right now. The mothers who've noticed changes in their children but are afraid to trust their instincts. The wives who walk on eggshells in their own homes, who've been convinced that their husband's anger is somehow their fault. I'm telling this story for the children who think what's happening to them is normal, who've been taught that keeping secrets is more important than seeking help. Most importantly, I'm telling this story to say, this: you are not alone. You are not powerless. You are not responsible for someone else's choice to hurt you or your children. And sometimes, when everything seems hopeless, when the system seems designed to protect predators instead of victims, the only choice that matters is the one you make in that moment when you decide to fight. For me, that moment came when I kicked open a bedroom door and saw my daughter's terrified face. For you, it might be different, but when it comes, and you'll know when it comes, trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Trust your love for your children. And remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing what's right despite the fear, despite the odds, despite the voices telling you to stay quiet and keep the peace. The world has changed since 1969. There are hotlines now support networks laws that didn't exist when I was fighting my battle alone. But predators have evolved too. They're still charming, still respected, still protected by systems that value reputation over truth. They still count on silence, on shame, on the assumption that no one will believe they're victims. Don't give them that gift. Speak up. Fight back. Protect your children with the same fierce determination that you'd use to protect them from a burning building or a speeding car. Because that's what abuse is: a fire that consumes everything in its path, a collision that destroys lives and futures and dreams. But fire can be extinguished. Collisions can be survived. And sometimes, if you're very brave and very lucky and very persistent, justice can be served.
My name was Josephine Marie Connors. I was a teacher, a mother, a survivor. I saved my children from a monster who wore the face of their father.
And if I could do it in 1969 in a small town where women had no power and children had no voice, then you can do it too. Wherever you are, whenever you need to. The monsters are still out there, but so are we.
And we are not afraid anymore.
30 years after Charles Morrison's conviction, I received a letter that would forever change how I viewed our story. It came from a woman named Sarah Beth Thompson, postmarked from Seattle. Dear Mrs. Collins,
I hope you don't mind me reaching out. Detective Kane gave me your address. She said you might want to hear from someone like me.
My name is Sarah Beth, but when I was 7 years old, my name was Beth. I was one of the little girls in that white dress sitting on that couch in Mr. Kellerman's basement the night you saved your daughter.
I wanted to thank you. Because of your courage, because you were willing to follow your daughter into that horrible place and document what you saw my abusers went to prison too. I was able to get therapy, grow up in a safe foster home, and build a life I never thought possible. I'm a social worker now. I specialize in child protection. Last year alone, I helped remove 43 children from dangerous situations. Every time I knock on a door to investigate a report of abuse, I think of you. I think of how one mother's courage saved not just her own children, but dozens of others. I have a daughter now. She's 8, the same age Marianne was when everything happened. Sometimes I look at her playing in our backyard, safe and happy and innocent, and I remember that little girl I used to be. The one who thought she'd never escape, never be normal, never be loved.
That little girl was wrong, and she was wrong because of you.
I know we'll probably never meet, but I wanted you to know the ripples from your courage are still spreading. Every child I save, every family I help heal, every predator we put behind bars, it all traces back to that night when you decided to fight.
Thank you for showing us that monsters can be defeated, that even the most powerless among us have the strength to change the world.
With infinite gratitude, Sarah Beth Thompson.
P.S. My daughter is learning to read. The first book I'm going to read with her is one about brave women who stand up for what's right. I thought you should know.
I read that letter sitting in my garden in Oregon, surrounded by the roses I'd spent decades nurturing. For the first time since 1969, I allowed myself to feel not just survival, not just justice, but something approaching peace. The scars would always be there. The nightmares would never completely fade. But Sarah Beth's letter reminded me of something I'd forgotten in all the years of looking backward, the future we'd created by refusing to stay silent. Marianne was right when she said she wanted to help other children. But it wasn't just her choice that changed lives. It was the choice we made together that night in Mr. Kellerman's yard, when we decided that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The monsters are still out there wearing suits and smiles and wedding rings. They still count on silence, on shame, on the assumption that no one will believe they're victims.
But they're wrong.
Because we're still out there too. The mothers and daughters and survivors who refuse to be silent, who refuse to let evil hide behind respectability. And every time one of us speaks up, every time one of us fights back, every time one of us saves a child from the darkness, the light grows a little brighter, and the monsters have a little less room to hide. This story is dedicated to every child who has suffered in silence, every mother who has fought impossible odds, and every survivor who has found the courage to speak their truth. You are not alone, you are not forgotten, and you are braver than you know.